A bus driver pulled over without warning. No one expected why. He was always exactly on time. That's the first thing people noticed about Harold James. Every morning, like clockwork, his city bus would roll up at 7:03 a.m. Never a minute early, never a minute late. Rain, snow, sun, it didn't matter. Route 84 ran like a heartbeat through the quiet edges of the city, and Harold was the one behind the wheel. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. That morning started like every other. The sky was gray, just beginning to blush with early light. Cars crept along wet pavement. A man in a suit held his briefcase over his head, trying to shield himself from the drizzle. And Harold? He was already at the depot, buttoning the last clasp on his uniform jacket, nodding to the mechanic with the usual, "Morning, Tony." Tony looked up from a clipboard and grunted, "Bus 211's fueled and ready. Brakes are solid." Harold gave a small thumbs up. That was all he needed to hear. He climbed into the seat, adjusted the rearview mirror, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. No music, no chatter, just the low rumble of the engine and the faint tap of rain on the windshield. At the first stop on Pine and 7th, a young woman in scrubs got on. She didn't look up, just scanned her pass and went straight to the middle row. Harold gave a soft nod. She didn't notice. At the next stop, 3 teenagers clambered on, backpacks soaked and laughter loud. One of them said, "Hey, Harold," like they did every day. Harold nodded again. Stop after stop, more people climbed aboard, some half asleep, others already on their second coffee. No one really talked to each other. They just slid into their seats, opened their phones, and slipped into their own worlds. But Harold watched. Not in a nosy way, just with quiet attention. He always did. It was something his wife used to say about him before she passed. "You don't miss a thing, do you?" she told him once, when he noticed the flicker in a street lamp before anyone else did. By 7:42, the bus was nearly full. People were standing now, holding onto the overhead bars. The morning routine was humming along. Normal. Predictable. And then something shifted. It started small. Harold's eyes lingered just a little too long on the rearview mirror. He looked at it. Then the road. Then back again. No one noticed at first. Not really. But then the bus slowed. In a spot it never did. They were approaching a long, empty stretch between 2 main stops. Usually Harold would cruise right through, 35 miles per hour, easy. But today, he was easing off the gas. Way off. So much so that a few people glanced up, confused. A man near the front looked out the window. "Huh," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Why are we slowing down?" The scrubs woman glanced up from her phone, then looked out the window too. Nothing out there, just trees on one side and a wire fence on the other. Harold's knuckles were tight on the wheel. His foot hovered over the brake. From the back, one of the teens said, "Yo, what's going on?" in a half-joking tone. But Harold didn't answer. His eyes were fixed now, locked onto something just past the windshield. That's when the engine dropped into a lower hum. The bus was coasting now, slowing more. And then, a sharp pull to the right. Brakes. The tires hissed against the curb as the entire bus lurched to a stop. People rocked forward. Someone dropped their coffee. A woman gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. But no one said it out loud. Because in that split second, everyone felt it. Something was wrong. And Harold James, the man who never stopped unless there was a scheduled reason, had just pulled over without warning, in a place where he never had before. No one knew why. But everyone was about to find out. The bus was silent. Not the normal kind of silence you get early in the morning when people are tired or lost in thought. This was different. This was the kind that made people put their phones down. The kind that made the hair on your arms stand up, even though no one had said a word yet. Harold didn't move. His hands were still on the wheel, but his posture had changed. Rigid, stiff, like he was bracing for something. His eyes were narrowed, focused dead ahead through the windshield. Passengers looked around at each other. The teenager in the back, who'd been joking before, now looked unsettled. He leaned toward his friend and whispered, "Why'd he stop?" No one answered him. The man near the front, older, silver hair, glasses, cleared his throat and leaned into the aisle a bit. "Sir, everything all right up there?" Still, Harold didn't respond. His right hand left the wheel for just a moment and hovered over the dashboard radio, but he didn't press anything. Instead, he just looked. Forward. At what? No one knew. The nurse in scrubs, Tasha, stood slowly. She looked around at the others, then back at Harold. "Sir?" she asked, soft but steady. "Is there something in the road?" He didn't turn toward her, but he spoke. "I thought I saw something." That was it. Just 5 words. But the way he said them, low, almost like he didn't trust his own eyes, made Tasha's stomach twist. The older man stood now too. He walked a few steps toward the front and peered out the large windshield. Nothing but trees and gravel shoulder. "There's nothing there," he said, then added with an awkward chuckle, "Maybe a plastic bag or something?" Harold didn't laugh. It wasn't a bag. Tasha moved closer, just behind the older man now. "What did you see?" Harold paused. Then he blinked and looked up at the mirror. "A child," he said quietly. "I saw a little girl. She ran across the road." The bus remained still, humming faintly from the idling engine. Inside, no one made a sound. Someone near the middle scoffed. A woman's voice. "There's no kid out there." Tasha's voice cut through. "Did anyone else see it?" Nothing. Phones started coming out. People craned to look out windows. Some shifted in their seats, peeking past each other. But all they saw was the shoulder, the trees, the fence behind them. Tasha looked at Harold again. "You're sure?" "I've been driving this route for 14 years, he said. "I know what I saw." A teenage girl in the back stood up. "What if she's still out there?" Harold didn't speak, but his hand moved again, this time to the gear shift. He put the bus in park. Tasha turned to the passengers. "I'm a nurse. I'll check it out." The older man frowned. "You shouldn't go alone." "I'll go with her," the teenage girl offered, already moving toward the door. Harold pressed the release. The doors hissed open. Cool morning air rushed in, carrying the damp smell of pine and wet earth. Tasha and the girl stepped out slowly, scanning the roadside. From inside, people leaned against the windows. A few muttered. Others watched in silence. Harold didn't move. He just kept staring forward, jaw tight, still unsure if what he saw had been real, or something his mind played on him. Inside the bus, one passenger whispered, "If there was a kid, why would she be out here?" No one had an answer. Outside, Tasha walked further down the shoulder, shoes crunching over damp gravel. The girl followed, scanning the brush. And on that bus, with 30 strangers now united by one man's unexplained stop, something had shifted. It wasn't just about getting to work anymore. They were waiting for something else now. Waiting to find out if Harold James was right, or if something far more confusing was going on. The bus doors were still open. Tasha and the girl were about 20 yards ahead now, crouched low, peering into the brush at the side of the road. Everyone inside was watching them, the way you watch something on TV, not moving, barely blinking. No one knew what to do. Harold stayed in his seat, still gripping the wheel, eyes forward. He hadn't looked at anyone. He hadn't even looked at Tasha when she stepped off. It was like part of him was stuck in that moment, still seeing what he thought he saw. Inside the bus, someone finally spoke. A man in his 30s, dressed in a navy windbreaker. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "We're going to be late because of a ghost." A few people shifted, uneasy. No one laughed. A teenage boy by the back window leaned forward. "What if she's real?" he said. "What if she ran off the road and nobody else saw her?" "I didn't see anything," a woman near the middle said, arms crossed. "And I was looking." "Yeah," someone else added. "He probably saw a dog or something." That made Harold turn, just slightly. He didn't say anything, but the movement was enough to quiet the chatter. Tasha and the girl were still out there. Now they were walking further up the road, checking behind a small guardrail. One of them bent down. It looked like they were checking the ditch. Inside, a boy near the front spoke up. "Is this even safe? What if there's some kind of, I don't know, guy out there, luring people?" The idea hung in the air for a second too long. Someone toward the back said, "Come on, it's a kid, not a trap." "How do you know?" People were turning now, looking at each other. Strangers a few minutes ago, now suddenly connected, anxious, talking like they knew each other. And still, Harold said nothing. He just stared. A bus that should have been halfway downtown by now was sitting still, idling on the side of the road while 30 people tried to figure out whether or not they were part of something serious. Harold finally spoke. Quiet. Flat. "I know what I saw." Everyone turned. "I saw a little girl. In pink. She came out of those trees." He nodded slightly toward the left. "She looked scared. She ran out fast. Then she was gone." The woman with folded arms sighed. "And no one else saw her?" "I didn't say that," Harold replied. The silence after that was sharp. No one wanted to admit it, but they were starting to believe him, or at least believe that he believed it. Tasha stood up straight outside. The girl next to her looked back toward the bus and shook her head. Nothing. But then, Tasha held up a hand. She turned back toward the trees, stepped over the guardrail, and disappeared behind it. Inside, everyone leaned. Someone stood up. "What's she doing? Where'd she go?" Harold didn't move, but his fingers twitched against the steering wheel. A moment passed. 2. And then a sharp yelp, short, not loud, but real. Someone gasped. "Did you hear that?" Harold was already moving. He stood up, stepped down the stairs, and out of the bus. Passengers crowded toward the front, peering through the windshield, pressing faces against glass. Another voice, this one unmistakably Tasha's, called out, "I found something." The teenage girl reappeared first, eyes wide. "There's a kid!" she shouted. "She's down there!" Gasps rippled through the bus. People stood up. A man dropped his phone. The woman with crossed arms sat down hard, eyes wide. "She's real?" someone said. But no one answered. They just watched as Harold disappeared behind the guardrail, headed toward the sound of a child crying. Because whatever this was, it had just become very real. The bus sat quietly on the shoulder, engine humming low, doors wide open. But nobody moved. Nobody even breathed too loud. Inside, it felt like time had slowed down. A few people were still standing, craning their necks to see through the windshield. Others had pressed up against the windows. Even the skeptical ones, the ones who'd rolled their eyes and muttered about being late, had gone quiet now. Everyone was listening. Somewhere beyond the trees, past the rusted guardrail, a little girl was crying. Not loud, not hysterical, but enough to be real. Enough to make the back of your throat tighten when you heard it. The teenage girl who had gone with Tasha was back on the bus now, standing in the stairwell, breath short and quick. "She's down there," she said again, this time softer. "There's a kid. She's like hiding in the weeds." A man near the front turned to her. "Is she hurt?" The girl shook her head. "I don't know. She wouldn't talk. She just cried." From outside, footsteps pounded against the pavement. Tasha appeared in the doorway, holding the child in her arms. The bus went still. The little girl couldn't have been older than 2. Her hair was tangled, matted with leaves. A big scrape ran down one side of her face, dirt smeared across her cheeks and arms. She wore a pink shirt and mismatched socks. No shoes. Tasha's voice was calm but urgent. "Call 911. Harold was right behind her, already reaching for the radio. "This is Bus 211. We have a child found on the roadside, possibly injured. I need emergency services on Route 84, 2 miles east of the Willow Creek overpass." People shifted. The woman who'd been folding her arms all morning now had her hand over her mouth. The man in the windbreaker leaned forward, stunned. Nobody argued anymore. No one talked about being late. The child clung to Tasha, burying her face in the woman's chest. Her small body trembled. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Tasha sat down gently on the front bench, still holding the girl close. "She was just lying there," she said quietly to no one in particular, like she was waiting for someone to come back for her. The older man with the glasses rubbed his face with both hands. "Jesus." From the back, a voice said, "What was she doing out here alone?" No one had an answer. But the question hung in the air, heavy and real. Harold remained by the radio, relaying information in that same steady voice. But if you looked close, you could see his hands trembling just slightly. He turned to Tasha. "You okay?" She nodded once. "She's cold. Scraped up, but no broken bones that I can feel." A siren howled faintly in the distance. People inside the bus didn't relax. They just watched. Waiting. Outside, a few cars had started to slow down, curious about the stopped bus and the gathering cluster of people. One driver rolled down their window, then kept going when they saw the child. Inside, the nurse pulled a small blanket from her bag. "Always carry one," she said. "For shifts. You never know." She wrapped the girl gently, whispering something no one else could hear. Someone near the back said, "I can't believe he actually saw her from that far away." "He saved her life," another voice added. "If he hadn't stopped." They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't have to. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flickered in the distance, growing closer. Harold stepped back, away from the wheel, letting the reality of it all settle in. He didn't smile. He didn't puff his chest or wait for praise. He just stood there, quiet as always. The passengers stayed where they were, still, hushed. What had started as a normal morning, a bus ride like any other, had turned into something no one could explain away or forget. They were all a part of it now, because of one man, one stop, and one little girl that no one but him had seen. The ambulance pulled up fast, tires spitting gravel as the sirens cut off. 2 EMTs jumped out before the vehicle even came to a full stop. The taller one carried a medical bag. The shorter one was already pulling on gloves. Tasha stood and gently handed the girl over, speaking quickly, clearly, like she'd done this 100 times before. No visible fractures, bruising on the arms, mild abrasions to the cheek and forehead. Responsive but nonverbal, cold to the touch. The EMT nodded. How long was she outside? Tasha shook her head. Can't say. She wasn't wearing shoes. The little girl didn't cry as they laid her on the stretcher. She didn't do anything, just stared upward, blinking slowly, like the world was too big and too loud for her. One of the passengers finally stepped off the bus, then another. Soon there were at least a dozen people gathered just outside, watching quietly, like they weren't sure if they were allowed to witness something this real. Harold didn't move. He stayed on the bottom step of the bus, one hand on the railing, eyes fixed on the girl as the EMTs checked her pulse, her pupils, her breathing. His lips were pressed in a tight line. The older man with glasses turned to him. How did you see her? Harold answered without looking away. I didn't. Not really. I saw something move. Pink. Just for a second. Could have been trash. Could have been nothing. But you stopped anyway. Harold nodded once. Inside the ambulance, the EMTs worked quickly. They wrapped the girl in warming blankets, checked her oxygen, placed small monitors on her chest. Another siren in the distance. A second unit was arriving. This time, a sheriff's car. The bus riders parted as the cruiser pulled up. A deputy stepped out, adjusting his belt, his face shifting from casual to serious the moment he saw the scene. Tasha walked over and started briefing him. Back near the bus, people were still standing around. The woman who'd complained earlier now looked pale. She rubbed her arms like she was cold. What if he hadn't stopped? She whispered. No one answered her. The teenage boy who'd joked earlier just stood with his hood up, eyes fixed on the ambulance. He looked smaller now, not scared, just unsure. The sheriff made his way over to Harold. You the driver? Harold nodded. I'm going to need a statement. Of course. The sheriff looked toward the trees. You saw her run across the road? I thought I did. But when you stopped, she wasn't there. No. And you didn't hear anything? No. The sheriff squinted. You just felt something? Harold looked at him finally. I've driven this road every day for 14 years. Same trees, same shadows. I've seen bags blow across the road. Squirrels. Lost balloons. But this time, he paused. This time, something was different. The sheriff didn't respond right away. He just nodded. Well, thank God you listened to it. Back inside the bus, a few people had returned to their seats. Others stayed outside, unsure of the rules now. Were they allowed to get back on? Was the ride continuing? Was anyone going to work today? Tasha walked up the steps and sat down next to Harold on the front bench. She looked tired now. Not physically, just emotionally drained. She'll be okay, she said quietly. They think she wandered off sometime last night. No one's reported her missing yet. Harold let out a breath, like he'd been holding it since he stopped the bus. I've been asking myself, he said, what would have happened if I kept driving? Tasha looked at him. Don't. But I can't stop thinking about it. You stopped. That's what matters. Outside, the ambulance doors shut. Lights still flashing, the vehicle pulled away slowly, headed for the hospital. People watched until it disappeared around the curve. The sheriff began taking names. The passengers waited in line, some talking in low voices, some not talking at all. But everyone knew what had just happened. It wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't luck. It was one man, doing the one thing no one expected, stopping when it didn't make sense, and seeing what no one else did. The sheriff took down names one by one. Full names, contact info, a quick account of what each person saw, if they saw anything. Most hadn't. A few admitted they'd been looking at their phones. Others tried to remember details that weren't there. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying the smell of damp pavement and pine through the open bus doors. No one got back on. Not yet. It felt wrong somehow, like trying to return to normal too quickly would undo what had just happened. Harold stood off to the side near the guardrail, arms folded across his chest, staring at the spot where the girl had been found. He hadn't said much since the ambulance left. He didn't need to. His silence now said more than anything. Tasha walked over, her hands tucked into her jacket sleeves. She stood next to him but didn't speak for a while. "She was down there," she said finally, nodding toward the brush, wedged between the ditch and the fence. "You couldn't see her unless you were standing right above her." Harold nodded slowly. "I didn't see her face. Just something pink moving near the ground." Tasha exhaled. It was enough. Behind them, the teenage girl who had helped earlier walked along the edge of the road, eyes scanning the grass. She stopped suddenly and bent down. A second later, she stood up holding a small shoe, tiny, pink, and soaked through. She held it in the air. "I think this is hers." Tasha turned and walked over to her. She took the shoe gently, looked it over, then held it against her own palm. "She couldn't have been more than 2, she said. Harold didn't move. A few passengers had drifted toward the edge of the scene now, standing near where the girl had been. No one spoke loudly. No one joked. Even the ones who hadn't believed him before now stood silently, as if the weight of it all had finally caught up. The sheriff finished taking statements and approached Harold again. "We'll have investigators come by this afternoon," he said. "Check the area. See if there are any signs of where she came from. Could be a house nearby, or a car accident we haven't heard about yet." Harold nodded but didn't look away from the brush. "Just so you know," the sheriff added, "what you did today, most people wouldn't have. You trusted your gut. That little girl's alive because of it." Harold didn't answer. Not because he didn't care, but because it didn't feel like something to be proud of. It felt like something that should have never needed to happen. The sheriff clapped a hand on his shoulder, then walked back to the cruiser. People began returning to the bus slowly, hesitantly, like they were re-entering a space that had changed somehow. Inside, the energy was different. The noise level, the posture, the way people looked at each other, it had all shifted. There were no headphones, no yawns, no one scrolling through social media or sipping coffee. They just sat there, thinking, processing. Harold stepped back up into the driver's seat. His hands hovered over the wheel, but he didn't start the engine yet. The man in the windbreaker leaned toward him. "Take your time," he said. "We're not in a hurry." No one disagreed. Tasha took her seat near the front again. She looked over at Harold. "You okay to drive?" He gave a quiet nod. "Yeah." She waited a beat. "You sure?" Harold glanced at the rearview mirror. The passengers were quiet. All of them. Waiting. Not impatient, but ready to follow his lead. He took a deep breath, then turned the key. The engine rumbled back to life. He pulled the bus gently back onto the road. And as they rolled forward, no one asked about being late. No one cared about missed meetings or skipped breakfasts. They were all thinking about a patch of grass on the side of the road, a girl in pink, and the man who decided, for reasons even he couldn't fully explain, that it was worth stopping. The ride back into town was nothing like the ride out. No one spoke. Not a whisper. Not a cough. Not even the sound of someone unzipping a bag. The hum of the engine and the steady squeak of the wipers moving rain off the windshield were the only sounds that filled the space. Harold kept his eyes forward. His grip on the wheel had loosened, but his jaw was still tight. He wasn't thinking about the route anymore. He knew it by heart. What he was thinking about was that moment, just before he stopped the bus. That flicker of pink. That split second of something out of place. How easy it would have been to ignore it. To keep going. They were halfway through downtown when Tasha finally broke the silence. She made a sound, she said softly, like she was still trying to believe it herself. It wasn't loud, not a scream, just this tiny broken cry, like she'd been waiting all night for someone to hear her. Harold glanced at her through the mirror. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring out the window, hands folded in her lap, speaking more to herself than anyone else. A few people leaned forward slightly in their seats, listening. I had to climb down into the ditch to reach her, she continued. She was curled up on her side, hugging her knees, covered in leaves. She looked up when I called out, but she didn't move. I don't think she could. The teenage girl across the aisle from her spoke up next. Her voice was quiet but steady. When you picked her up, she grabbed your shirt. I saw it, like she wasn't going to let go. Tasha nodded slowly. Another woman, this one near the middle of the bus, added, She didn't cry when they took her away. No, said Tasha. She didn't. She just kept holding on. The words hung there, soft, heavy. Then a voice from the back, a man who hadn't said anything all morning, spoke. There's no houses out there, not for miles. A murmur moved through the rows. So how'd she get there? Someone asked. Everyone turned to Harold. He didn't answer at first. He kept his eyes on the road, signaling before making a smooth left at an intersection. Then finally he said, She didn't walk there. A beat passed. You think someone left her? The teenage boy asked. Harold didn't answer right away. He just said, She couldn't have gotten that far alone, not without shoes, not in that cold. The idea settled over the bus like a fog. Someone had left her. A little girl. Alone. In the dark. On the side of a road where no one ever stops. Tasha looked down at her hands. What kind of person does that? No one had an answer. Because the truth was, it didn't make sense. No explanation would. All they knew was what had happened after. A woman with short hair near the front cleared her throat. Do you think she would have survived another night? Harold didn't hesitate. No. That was it. One word. But it hit harder than any long explanation could have. The bus turned onto Main Street. People were starting to gather at stops again. People who hadn't been on the ride that morning, who didn't know what had happened just an hour earlier. They stood there with headphones in, backpacks slung over shoulders, sipping coffee, completely unaware that the man driving the bus had just saved a child's life. Harold pulled up to the next stop and opened the doors. A young guy stepped on, gave him a polite nod. Morning. Harold nodded back. The passenger walked down the aisle and found a seat. He didn't notice that everyone else was silent, or that their eyes were red, or that the nurse in scrubs near the front had a blanket folded neatly in her lap. The doors closed again. The bus rolled forward, and still, not one person pulled out their phone. Because some mornings change you, and this was one of them. The bus pulled into the central depot just after 9:00 a.m., almost 2 full hours behind schedule. But nobody cared. Not a single person stood up when it stopped. They just sat there, staring out the windows or down at their hands, as if they didn't quite know what to do next. Harold turned the key, and the engine cut off. The sudden quiet made the space feel even heavier. Tasha was the first to move. She stood slowly, then turned to face the rest of the passengers. They'll keep her overnight, she said. For observation. The hospital's calling child services. Heads nodded. Quiet. A few people exchanged looks. No one smiled. There was nothing to celebrate yet. A man near the back finally asked, What happens to her now? Tasha hesitated. She'll go into protective custody most likely, depending on whether they can find her parents or whoever left her there. A murmur. Soft, uneasy. One woman near the front spoke up. If they do find whoever left her, they better not just walk away from it. Someone behind her agreed. That's not just neglect. That's... She didn't finish the sentence. Harold remained in his seat at the front, both hands resting on the wheel, eyes down. Tasha stepped off the bus first. A few others followed, quietly. No chatter, no small talk. Just a quiet line of people walking down the steps, like they'd just stepped out of something sacred. As the teenage girl passed Harold, she paused. "Thank you," she said. Harold looked up at her. Just a little. "I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," she replied. "You stopped." The man in the windbreaker followed behind her. "You saved her life. You can't pretend that didn't happen." Harold didn't respond. Not with words. But his eyes flicked toward the spot on the horizon where the road disappeared into the trees. The same road he'd driven hundreds, maybe thousands of times without ever stopping. Today had changed that. And him. More passengers filtered off. Some gave Harold a nod. A few touched his shoulder as they passed. One woman whispered something like a prayer under her breath. No one made a big scene. There were no dramatic speeches or clapping. But they felt it. All of them. By the time the bus was empty, the depot was waking up. Other drivers were pulling in. Radios were buzzing. People were laughing at vending machines and scrolling their phones. Like nothing had happened. Like it was just another Tuesday. Harold sat alone in the driver's seat for a long moment before finally standing. He grabbed his jacket, stepped off the bus, and walked toward the operations window. The dispatcher looked up. "You're late." Harold nodded. "Breakdown?" "No." "Passenger issue?" "No." The dispatcher waited, expecting more. Harold just said, "Had to make a stop." He turned and walked out. As he stepped into the parking lot, he spotted the sheriff's cruiser still parked nearby. The deputy from earlier was on his radio, but he gave Harold a small nod as he passed. "Update came through," he said. "No reports of a missing kid yet." Harold stopped. "Still?" "Still. Nobody's come forward. No calls. No neighbors asking about a lost child." They both stood there for a moment, letting that sink in. "She didn't have a chance," the deputy added. "Not if you hadn't seen her." Harold didn't say anything. He just nodded once, then kept walking. As he reached his truck, he paused and looked back toward the depot. One of the passengers from earlier, an older woman, was standing at the curb, watching him. She didn't wave. She didn't say anything. She just gave him a look. A quiet, knowing look that said more than words ever could. Harold climbed into his truck, turned the key, and pulled out of the lot. The city moved around him, the same as always. Cars sped through yellow lights. People crossed streets with their heads down. Life, uninterested in pausing, rolled forward. But for one little girl and one bus driver, it had all stopped just long enough. And that had made all the difference. Harold sat in his truck in the grocery store parking lot, engine off, hands resting in his lap. He'd pulled in 20 minutes ago and hadn't moved since. The radio was still set to his usual talk station, but the voices coming through barely registered. His mind was somewhere else, still on the side of that road, still seeing pink through the trees, still hearing the sound of gravel under his boots as he stepped off the bus to find out whether he was losing his mind or trusting it. He rubbed his eyes, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't just another day anymore. It never would be again. His phone buzzed. A text from dispatch. "News outlets are asking for your name. Want us to give it to them? Harold stared at the screen for a long second before tapping back one word. No. He slipped the phone back into his coat pocket and looked out the windshield. People passed by pushing carts, unloading bags. Life hadn't changed for them, and it shouldn't have. Inside the store, a woman stood near the automatic doors. Short gray hair, floral blouse. She had been on the bus that morning. He recognized her immediately. Their eyes met. She gave a soft nod. Not a smile, just quiet recognition. He nodded back. That was enough. Across town, in a pediatric unit filled with soft beeping monitors and the faint scent of antiseptic, a little girl was asleep. Clean now. Warm. She had a stuffed bear under one arm, given to her by a nurse, and a white hospital bracelet with the word Jane Doe printed across it in small black letters. A social worker sat just outside the room filling out paperwork. So far, no calls, no missing person reports, no panicked parent rushing through hospital doors. Nothing. Just silence. But the girl was alive, because someone stopped. Back in the depot, Tasha clocked out of her shift. She was still wearing the same clothes from that morning, a folded blanket tucked under her arm. As she passed by the lounge, another nurse from her route caught up with her. "Hey," she said. "I heard what happened. You okay?" Tasha paused, then nodded slowly. "Yeah." "You were the one who found her, right?" Tasha hesitated. "No," she said. "Harold found her. I just went to look." The nurse didn't say anything else, just gave her a pat on the shoulder and moved on. Tasha stood there a moment longer, then made her way to the exit. At the end of the day, when the sky turned amber and the shadows grew long across the sidewalks, Harold sat on the back porch of his small house, a mug of coffee in his hand, barely touched. A notebook sat on the table beside him. Inside it were dozens of handwritten notes, bus schedules, shift hours, routes. He picked up his pen, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote something new. Route 84, 7:47 a.m., stopped at unmarked shoulder near Willow Creek. He paused, then added, "One life." That was it. No dramatic retelling, no glory, just the truth. The way Harold had always seen the world. Straight, simple, precise. Inside, the TV played faintly. The news was already picking up the story. "Bus driver's quick thinking saves missing toddler." Anchors smiled politely at the camera. But Harold didn't go inside. He didn't need to hear it. He hadn't done it to be noticed. He'd done it because something in him refused to ignore what didn't feel right. And that choice, the smallest, simplest decision, had changed the course of a life. Maybe more than one. And as the sun sank behind the trees and the day finally exhaled, Harold sat quietly. Just a man, just a driver, but not just anything anymore. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.